Hello again. I can't believe this week has already come to an end. 7 shows in, but it has come to an end. So Great Escape Week. This is the concluding episode. So we have looked at the history from various different angles. I've really enjoyed the different ways we've looked at it from the point of view of people getting back home, not getting back home, the murders. Was the escape a worthwhile event? Was it not a worthwhile event? We've come at it from all angles. Now we're going to talk about the movie. So it's all just a bit of light-hearted, semi-serious chatting tonight. So the first 2 people I enlisted were Matt and Robbie from Fighting on Film podcast. You can find the link below to how to listen to there. How many shows have you done so far, you guys?
We're on 12.
12 shows now. So they take apart movies like The Wild Geese and Go for Broke and all those things there. So if you haven't checked them out, check out their link. Merryn Walters is joining us, who writer and one of the independent company members of We Have Ways of Making You Talk, and always on Twitter and active. And so here we are. 4 of us are going to thrash out the Great Escape. So first question to everybody is when did you first see it? And was it a big thing for you? Did you realize you were touching greatness when you first saw it? So Robbie, we'll start with you because I think you're the youngest.
Yeah, I think I might be. Well, for me, I think it was one of those films that must have come free with like a newspaper or something. And I think I must have attempted to watch it like 3 or 4 times when I was younger. And then throughout the years, I sort of have come back to it, maybe watched a little more. So maybe in the last couple of years, I actually watched it the whole way through. And then I think, yeah, it probably took me about 10 years to get through the film because it's quite a long one. But no, it's a classic. They don't make films like this anymore, do they? I think that's one of the things I take away from it.
I mean, they should make films like that. I think I'm going to say that right now. But yeah, they don't make films like that. So, Matt, same question to you. When did you first see it? You know, was it a big influence on you? Was it kind of a slow burn?
It's a good question. I think it must have been at Christmas at some point when I first saw it, because it's just one of those classic films that's always on in like a holiday period, you know, Easter, Christmas type thing that's always seems to be on the television. I always really enjoyed it. It's just one of those late afternoon films you sort of like you sit down and end up, you know, just taken in by osmosis. It's just such a good film. It's one of those. It's an epic in length, but it's an ensemble piece with some really quality actors. So I think it must have been a Christmas one year when I first saw it, probably when I was, I don't know, maybe like 7 or 8. And then God knows how many times I've seen it since. Probably not as many as you, Paul, but definitely.
Yeah, I've seen it a few times. Yeah. Let's bring Merryn in. So it's good to have some female representation because, and I'm not saying that women would react differently to the film than men, but the Steve McQueen factor. But Merryn, you know, first time you saw it, did you go gooey at Steve McQueen? That was an awful question.
I know, no, it's not an awful question. I think there's a lot to be said for being pragmatic about this. I didn't see it. I read it before I saw it. I'd read that one as well, Dam Busters. People don't realise Paul Brickhill, same book, same author. And for me, the first time I saw it, I was probably a teenager, so that's a long time ago. But it was in the same vein that people watch A Bridge Too Far. I just sat and watched this film and went, "That's not what happened. That's not in the book. No, they've got it all wrong." We sort of spend time talking now about Arnhem and Mark II parachutes and leopard tanks careering across the bridge, and we all get animated about it. I was incensed at the fact this film, with great actors clearly, nothing like the book. That was my first introduction to The Great Escape. I've probably seen it about 4,000 times since and chilled out a bit since then. But yeah, that was my first.
It's nothing like, we'll talk about this later. It's nothing like the book if you watch the second half first, which would be a weird way of watching it. But actually, if you watch the first half conventionally, the first half pretty much follows it. There's some character amalgamations, but broadly speaking, it tells the story of the traps and the subterfuge and the creation of the gadgets. It's when they get out of the camp, it just goes into complete flights of imagination. But we'll go into that later on. Interesting what you said there, Matt, about Christmas, because I don't know when I first saw it, but I do know that when I was about 10-ish, it was my favorite film before then. So I must have seen it before then. It was on Christmas Day, and it was a Christmas Day we were having at my granny and granddad's house. And I was allowed permission to watch it kind of watch it in the spare room, so I could kind of come and have a bite of turkey, run away, watch 10 minutes more, come back, be sociable for 5, go back again. And that I felt was a really big deal, that I was allowed to not be at the Christmas table for Christmas, because it was like, no, but mum, Gran, it's The Great Escape, it's. So I don't know when that was exactly. I'm 10 or 11, but it has been one of my favorite films since I was.
So Great Escape is independence for you. It's your sort of first taste of.
Yeah, I guess there was a sense of me escaping from my family via The Great Escape. There's an interesting psychological parallel there that we may or may not delve into later. But so that's that. We've established when we all first saw it. Now Robbie, you touched on this. We all did, and Merryn, it is a great cast. And I did a little impromptu thing about Lawrence Montaigne, who played Haynes for my channel this week, and John Sturges, who he's not a great director in the sense he's not doing the same sort of things like Scorsese or Francis Ford Coppola does, but he's great in the sense that what he does very well. And he always underscores his films with a good 2 or 3 leading characters, and then he fills out that middle bit with really good, solid supporting actors. And you see that in The Magnificent Seven, you see it in The Great Escape, you see it in Never So Few, Eagle Has Landed, Gunfight at the OK Corral. He always has that good middle group of people. And of course, when it came out, they weren't quite as big as stars as they became later. Charles Bronson was a decade away from global success. James Coburn made Great Escape and Charade in that one year. Then he kind of started going. Then it was in the Flynn films and what have you. Donald Pleasance was moving from theatre really to being mainstream movies. David McCallum had done The Long, Short, and the Tall. He'd done what's The Hill Drivers. But he hadn't got Man from U.N.C.L.E. yet. So they all went on to much bigger things later on. Actually, arguably, John Layton was the biggest star in terms of the second because of his pop career. I mean, at the time, in '63, he was riding high on in the pop charts. So maybe he was a bigger star than perhaps he would be perceived now. But in terms of when we're watching now, 77 years old, who's your favorite character? Do you have a favorite character? Do you have a character you don't like? Robbie, we'll go around the same way. Robbie,
for me, it's Donald Pleasance. And it has to be Donald Pleasance as Colin Blythe, the forger. I mean, he actually was in a Stalag Luft prison. He was shot down in a Lancaster on a daylight raid over France. So he knows how it feels to be to be a prisoner of war. But his character is just so darn lovable. You feel for him. I've written down everyone's got a caveat. So you have the forger who can't see. You've got the tunneler in Charles Bronson who doesn't like it being in close spaces, claustrophobic. Everyone important has this big caveat, but you really feel for Donald Pleasance. And then I may be getting ahead of myself, but the ending of his character in the film is just, I mean, it's if anyone's listened to a Wild Geese episode, it's like when Sandy gets killed. It's the same sort of that heart-wrenching moment. You're just like, Colin, no, you have to get out. You have to, I don't think it's fair, and that's why I just love Donald Pleasance in the film.
Yeah, I think he's the Rafer. If we're going to go to Wild Geese, I think he's the Rafer. I think he's the heart of the film. He's the conscience, and so he's us because he's not. He shouldn't really be there. Yeah, I don't identify with Steve McQueen. I'm not a tough guy who could be cool and look. I identify more as someone who's quite good at a trade, and that's how he got himself in. That's what I identify with Donald Pleasance in that regard. Matt. Mary, anything to add on Donald Pleasance in the film?
I love his bear calls when he's doing the bear call whistles in the hall where they're, everyone in there's working on forging papers and they're trying to bore the guards out of the room, and he describes the I can't remember exactly what kind of bird it was, but he is describing
it's a warbler, isn't it? I think of some kind.
Just a warbler. He nails the bear call, and it's just.
Well, does he though? I'm just wondering when you said that. If there are any ornithologists watching,
that's true.
As you said, Merryn, we would watch. We would recognise leopard tanks portraying tiger. But is the bird call authentic?
I mean, it's pretty convincing. Let's say
it's convincing. But then, if you don't know tanks, a fake tank is convincing.
Jerry's know. because it's for the benefit of the guards and the goons, isn't it? So if the Jerrys, we don't even know. So sort of
That's
thing.
true. It doesn't need to be real. That's a good point, Robbie. It's only the Germans just have to think. He may have even made up the bird.
Yeah,
it may not even exist.
But if someone comes and goes, "Oh, that's what the blue tit sounds like," you'll be like, "Oh, okay, cool." You'll just take him as authority because unless you're David Attenborough, you probably don't know.
Nelly's warbler, apparently, according to Stick Ballard. It's a Nelly's warbler. Is that a real bird? It sounds like it's a real bird. No one would make that one up, would they?
Where he was convincing was when he was hanging around on set. He started making suggestions to Sturgis about what the camp should look like, and Sturgis dismissed him and said, "Really, I don't need to listen to actors telling me how to do things." And it was only afterwards, a couple of days afterwards, that somebody told Sturgis that Pleasance had been in Stalag Luft I. And at that point, he was then not roped in as technical sort of advice, but certainly people started listening to him.
Yeah, that's interesting that he would have kept it quiet, and maybe that's that British way of not kind of, I was in a camp, but it kind of coming out accidentally, really. But yeah, he's an amazing character. By the way, folks, when I'm sharing the screen, I'm putting the suggested who the person is meant to be. So Pleasance is an amalgamation, his character Blythe, of Tim Wallen, who is on the right, who was one of the guys murdered. There's also a guy called Alex Cassie, who was one of the forgers. There's also Pengelly, the Canadian. As we emphasized during our historical shows this week, you're talking about 600 people in that camp who were involved in the setting up and preparation of that escape. So there were dozens of forgers, dozens of carpenters, dozens of penguins and moles, and all these people there. So the point is, some of them are, I mean, obviously Roger Bushell, Roger Bartlett, they are one and the same, but with the other characters, they are an amalgamation. But Tim Wallen is one of the British forgers there, who was one of the 50 who was murdered. So although Donald Pleasance ends up dying in the movie, not in a murder, it's a death via the plane crash. He is kind of half represented by that. But Merryn, who's your favorite character?
The temptation is to say James Coburn. Right. Simply for the fact that his accent is horrendous, and it just makes me laugh all the time. If you've got to choose 3 people doing really bad accents, and you go for Dick Van Dyke in Mary Poppins, Don Cheadle in Ocean's 11, and James Coburn trying to be an Australian.
He really does sound like Dick Van Dyke in it, though.
Yeah, but I don't know that I have a favourite. James Garner just appeals to me, always has done ever since grew up with the Rockford Files. In a strange way, I think it might even be one of the there he is, one of the characters that doesn't get a lot of screen time, and that's Judd Taylor, who played Goff. And this was the scene in which he, Steve McQueen, and James Garner are trying the hooch, and the only word that they come out with is and that for me, all through my adult life, I don't think I've ever been in a pub, but I haven't in my head gone, and that for me is the connection to the film.
I thought I had a photo of him, but I don't. But
I don't really.
I mean, he is. If we're going down, he's the most undeveloped of the lesser characters, isn't he? Yeah. I mean, he doesn't seem to get any kind of conclusion. I mean, at least Lawrence Montaigne, who dresses the German, gets out and gets murdered. In the sense that there's a character journey, but Goff just seems to be there to give McQueen his baseball mitt. That seems to be his only purpose in the movie.
But that's who he was as an actor. Judd Taylor, that's who he was as an actor. He was very much a supporting actor all the time. He did become vice president of the Guild of Directors of America later on, and the president sort of early 80s. He did loads of directorial stuff that we would now recognize. He did episodes of Star Trek. He did episodes of The Man from U.N.C.L.E. He did lots of TV movies. But in his earlier days as an actor, he was a supporting role. He
directed the Great Escape Return, the one with Christopher Reeve. He directed that, which I don't know he should be proud of particularly. It's a rather a film of 2 halves, but both of which are crap. But yeah. Matt, favorite character? Do you have one or actor?
I do. I have a couple. I really like Angus Lenny's as Archie Ives.
Yeah,
there he is. He's got such a small role, but he has this sort of like depth and likability in those scenes where he's a prisoner on the edge, and I think he's the sort of narrative or cinematic device that shows the viewer that these men they've all been imprisoned for 2, 3, maybe 4 years at this point. So they're desperate to get out. They've failed a number of times because they've all been put into this camp because they're expert escape artists and have made numerous attempts. So that they're all desperate to get out. But with Angus Lenny, you feel like he's more on the edge of he's kind of cracked up. And we get that from that scene where he's thrown into the cooler and he lands on the wall and he slides down, and you just feel that anguish. And then he has that likability where it's the interactions with Steve McQueen in the next cell, and he's talking about what it's like to be in I forget what town it is in my
Musselburgh.
Musselburgh. Yeah, and he's talking about what it's like to be a jockey in Scotland, and then he has that nice scene with Mac. So yeah, that's I really like Angus Lenny's character, but I also like David McCallum's character, who plays Royal Navy Ashley Pitt. Yeah, Eric Ashley Pitt, and he plays that brilliant sort of like Royal Navy flyer type role, and he has that famous scene at the end where he saves Bartlett and Mac temporarily at least by wrestling the Gestapo officer to the floor and shooting him with his own pistol. I just think he's quite charismatic in that role, and I always liked him in Man from U.N.C.L.E. too. So
I mean, I'll add mine, and I'm going to go with Charles Bronson actually, and simply because it proves in this film he can act. He wasn't a great actor. I'm not ever going to say he was up there with Marlon Brando and Kenneth Branagh or whatever, but a lot of his later output, he is just robotic, but he actually gives Valinsky that level of depth with the claustrophobia and the fact he'd battled personal demons to want to fly for Poland. And I think the interaction with John Layton is really good. To me, that's the buddy movie. Those two, the fact they do make it at the end, because the Angus Lenny, Steve McQueen, you sort of sense that Steve McQueen is kind of taking advantage of Angus Lenny a little bit, possibly. Mac and Bartlett, there's no closeness with their relationship. Theirs is one of practicality. So to me, it's Bronson and Layton who bring this you survive in that environment by having a really close friend, and that's that close friend you're intimate with, and everybody else you're kind of in a military environment with. And Valinsky clearly, when he's using the pickaxe and the guy's outside whacking the peg so he can disguise the hammer blows, that's Valinsky in control. That's him, the Tunnel King, and he was the reason the photos that Wally Floody, who we talked about in the other shows, was the real trap master who invented the way of setting up one of the men who had set up the traps. But with John Layton, Charles Bronson's character can admit who he is. That I'm terrified. I mean, of course, it all unravels on the night of the escape when his claustrophobia gets the better of him. But before then, he was putting on an act. And I think I bet there were a lot of veterans who were watching that film when it came out who identified with the aspect of putting on an act when you're with your buddies and being more human when you're with your close. But, I'm thinking of kind of the RAF. Everyone's terrified of flying, but no one admits it. Everyone's terrified of flying over Germany, but they all put on the act. Let's go and kill. And I like their characters in terms of what are they able to demonstrate with that fondness they have for each other. So he's my pick.
I think I was going to say that it's an act on more than one level as well, because from memory, I'm pretty sure that Bronson actually spoke Russian, but Valinsky turns around and says, I only know a couple of phrases in Russian, but Bronson did speak Russian.
Ja vas lublю. Yeah.
Ja vas lublю.
Yeah. And the fact that John Sturges was able to get that performance out of Charles Bronson is good. And John Layton is good. Again, he wasn't just a singer. He'd done Biggles on TV. He was Algie, I think, in the Biggles series that was in the early 60s. But he was singer first, actor second, probably. But he's good because he did a couple of things. He did Von Ryan's Express, Krakatoa East of Java, Guns at Batazi. But really, his acting career kind of dived off end of the decade. So Sturges has an ability to bring the best. I mean, look at Michael Caine in Eagles Landed. I know we go off on a tangent, but he slept walk through a lot of roles in the 70s, Get Carter excluded. But Eagle Has Landed, for all its kind of popcorn movie, he's really good in it, Michael Caine. So Sturges, I think, is one of those directors who brings the best out of people, even if they haven't got huge amounts of talent, in the case of perhaps Bronson. And Richard Attenborough can be accused of being quite wooden at times. I don't think he's at his best in The Great Escape, I'll be honest. I think he's a bit too intense, although that is very much how Bushell was. But I think he's much more. I like him in The Sand Pebbles. I think he's a much better 60s role for him than The Great Escape.
Yeah.
But so we've done a bit about the characters, and obviously we can dive back into them again and again as we go through the show. But the casting, Robbie, you know, because you're from a different generation than me, you know, so
right.
That is a really good lineup for an early 60s.
Yeah, I was saying to a friend earlier, think of it now as it's like the Marvel Avengers ensemble back then. So, you know, you've got, you know, Dickie Attenborough would be your Benedict Cumberbatch type. Coburn and James Garner would be your Robert Downey Jr. type. You know, you've got it's kind of that ilk for me. And when I look back at it, you know, you've got McQueen, who he's your cool guy. You've got Dick Attenborough as your straight down the line British guy. You've got James Garner as your sort of cheeky but sort of, you know, more cool American sort of thing. So I think it does hark now to that sort of. Now Marvel has sort of taken on that ensemble thing, but this movie is the Magnificent Seven before it as well. But of its time, I think you know, if you want to see who's famous back then, watch this movie. Who all the big players. There's no one coming in as sort of like, oh well, he was famous back in the 50s. It's like everyone is almost at the peak of their powers or are going to be straight after. Like take McQueen for instance. You know, he goes on to get an award nomination in The Sand Pebbles like 3 years later. So he really is on the precipice of glory in this one.
And what do we think about McQueen's role? I mean, for those who don't know, he was, when they started filming, they had a shooting script. And of course, because his character is spending time in the cooler, he's not having the interaction with the other prisoners in the same way. He's only interacting with Angus Lenny. And as Lawrence Montaigne told me, he was getting a bit grumpy on set. They flew in the script writers, they rewrote things, and the fact that he becomes part of the escape, where he goes around getting the bedboards, that was not on the printed page before they started shooting. That was all added during the shoot, and that must have led to other characters, people like Nigel Stock as Cavendish, David McCallum, Tom Adams, as having less and less to do as Steve McQueen took on. And in the end, he ends up being the guy with the trowel who goes through the earth and finds out the tunnel's short. I bet that wasn't meant to be him when the script was. I mean, I'd love to know who was meant to be doing that.
I think it's
what McQueen was.
I
was going to say. So James Garner did an interview just after the film with Jodie Foster came out. What's it called? Maverick, is it?
Maverick, yeah.
And he was saying that one of the challenges they got with McQueen is that he wanted to be heroic. Or rather, he wanted to be a hero without being heroic. So he wanted to be seen on screen as being the focus of attention. But he didn't necessarily want the character to have to sacrifice anything. When Steve McQueen, as you said, walked off the set, Garner and Coburn went to Garner's house in Munich to try and convince McQueen to come back. And they spent quite a time saying to him, come back, and we're confident that the screenwriters will enable you to be who you want to be on screen. And of course, the other thing he did was sign up and say, "I'll come and do it, but only if I can bring my love of bikes." And hence the great bike scene later on, and hence all the involvement with his chase. People often don't realise how split McQueen was. He is quoted as saying, "I'm not an actor. I'm a bike rider. This is what I do for a living. Acting is something that pays the bills." He was an international success. When he and Edkins got together in 1964, they represented America in the ICT trials. They were absolutely brilliant. acting was second fiddle for McQueen. He'd already built up a reputation as a motocrosser, flat track, grass, and this to him was an excuse to go and play. Yeah. He didn't see it necessarily as a headline film. He saw it as an excuse to play bikes.
I think it's interesting because when you watch it, he's top billing, but I don't think any of them are the main character at all. I think it's a very interesting film in that regard. I don't think there is a main character. I just think it's the story of the men, but I think it's interesting in how he's top billing. But for me, I don't think I wouldn't even class him as a main character.
If you look at how the posters and video covers have changed over the years, the way it's been advertised has changed fundamentally. At the time, Charles Bronson was nowhere near the posters, but now in the reissues, he's much up because of in the 70s. Charles Bronson's all over the covers because of all the Death Wish side of things. Late 60s, I bet David McCallum was more in the advertising. But while the subject of the motorbike chase came up, one of the things that occurred to me this week is the fictitious nature of the escapes. The aircraft, the motorbike is what we all use. That's the stick we use to beat the Great Escape film with. But the point I'm making that I would like your response to is if we hadn't had all that running on the platform scenes, the running through the town, the motorbike, the aircraft, if it had just been escape and then what really happened, which is a very quick swooping down of the Germans, everybody being captured pretty damn quickly, and then murders, I don't think we'd have any kind of regard for that movie whatsoever. It's the thrills come from the fiction, and we need to kind of embrace that and accept that's why we love it, even though we pretend we don't. Merryn, I want to bring in you because you're kind of the most learned of us. I'll bring Matt in because you're wise and good.
I'm the oldest. I'm not learned, I'm old.
Okay, but am I onto something there? Does that make sense?
Yes, I think you are. I think that there's, as we look back now, when we talk about 75 years ago, in terms of whether it's film, whether it's Second World War, we're becoming disconnected, disenfranchised from that period, from reality, from the integrity of what actually happened. And certainly if you think about when this film came out, 63, by the time we get to 73, 83, 10-year-olds, 20-year-olds, this has started to encapsulate our impression of what is acceptable as a story. And I think we may touch on this later on, but as children today are encouraged to look back at this film, they are seeing a real veneer on the Second World War. They are seeing an interpretation of the Second World War that's complete escapism. It's fantasy. As you said at the beginning, it's a sum of two parts. You've got the first part of the film that's about escapism and POWs, and there's some kind of integrity there. And the second half of the film may as well have a new title. It is like having two films. I like to think of it's in its own little niche as a film for me. It always will be. It can't be one thing or the other. And that I think is what I love so much about it, is that it constantly asks us to ask questions. What we're seeing now, what you've done this week, Paul, is again shine the spotlight on the fact that our interpretation of what happened then is not the reality. But this film has very much formed part of the legacy that we now refer to, the historiography that we now take as being gospel. And the next generations will look at this and carry on looking at this and have their tainted view of what the Great Escape was all about. It's up to us to actually carry on having this discussion and say, this is a film. This is not reality.
Yeah.
We haven't had Matt in much, Razor. Matt, what's your feeling about the shenanigans of the second half of the film?
So it strikes me that I think really if they'd probably known more about what happened to some of the people that were murdered, they could have made an equally interesting film from the stories of what happened. I think they were on the run. Was it 2 weeks they were on the run for in total? Yeah. They rounded everyone.
Some were.
Yeah, so that within that 2 weeks,
the longest who were out were 2 weeks. A lot though were swept up within 2 or 3 days.
So within that 2 weeks, interesting things were going to have been happening to those men. They were going to be encountering German civilians. They were going to be being captured. They were going to be, on the run. There were going to be, there's going to be scuffles. So they could have possibly had, film-worthy, exciting material. But I think it's also the thing with The Great Escape, is that they were running out of time and money by the end of the film. So they were moving, I believe they moved production to a town in Bavaria. And that had not only the some of the external shots, they could do the bike scenes with McQueen. They could do some of the the scenes where Attenborough is running through the town, that kind of thing. So they could do all that in that one place.
I think, was the town. Yeah,
I think so. So they could do all that in that one place, and that kind of probably, I think, with the number of script rewrites that were going on, probably coalesced into what came about. Because obviously, in your earlier episode, Woody, where you were talking about the back and forth with John, his name escapes me.
What are we talking about?
You had an episode earlier this week where you were talking with one of the other actors in the film by email.
Lawrence Fontaine, yeah, played Haynes, yeah.
That's it, thank you. And he was talking a lot about in the emails with you about scenes that were cut. There were things where he was on the run and he was supposed to see him be captured. So all those things have been cut out. So I think that affected the way that end sort of came together. And also, to get back to a point that Merryn was making, I think with McQueen, what's happened is obviously he became this iconic figure, and that sort of solidified his role within the film to become something more than it probably is. Because arguably, you could cut almost everything that McQueen does out of the film, and the film would still be pretty good. Yeah. I know that's kind of an iconoclastic thing to say, but you could easily cut out, the bike scene didn't happen. Great scene. That's what everyone thinks of. But it has no bearing on the historical quality. If it was Sturgis was appointed as director, so we know that. But let's say someone else had been, let's say Otto Preminger or someone, I don't know, who did In Harm's Way 3 years about the Pearl Harbor, was very wordy, not action, and now he's largely forgotten by people, except people who know their war films. So if it had been someone like that as a director, and they'd been black and white, and they'd followed the stories of the actual escapes and how, as we talked with Guy Walters earlier, it often ended with grubby, nasty murders in snowy ditches in various parts of the Third Reich, without the noble bits we talked about with Guy about when Gordon Jackson and Richard Attenborough could have that. I've never been happier. That which gives it this nobility in death. It doesn't make the murders any less tragic, but it somehow makes them more noble. As I said to Guy, it ends up with this A Tale of Two Cities kind of ending of this, I'm doing something where, as opposed to what actually happened was grubby, nasty murders. It would have ended up an underground movie that would not be being talked about on a show on YouTube, however many years. I think that ending, what it does is it's made The Great Escape, the escape movie that every other escape movie ever made is held up against, whether it came before or afterwards. So if you think of Escape from Colditz, the modern view, oh my God, that's pretty boring. Or there's a number of other much more cerebral sort of escape movies that are more brooding. And I exactly like you were saying, Woody, I think a more brooding film probably wouldn't be as enduring or as iconic.
And that's the thing, is how many historians, everybody I spoke to this week, their first entry to understand the story, apart from Merryn is the anomaly to the statistics here, was the film. The film was the entry point. I know I did have the Paul Brick, and I had exactly the same edition of the Dam Busters with that same cover as you had. But I'm sure it was the film first, then I sought out the book. So that surely proves that there are people who can take it for what it is, a piece of entertainment with a silly motorbike chase, and move on and become something else. Because we're, what you said there about what the judging, I'll bring you in a second, Robbie, is we've now had things like Band of Brothers and Saving Private Ryan, which are on a much higher level of accuracy than things were back in the 60s. There wasn't much effort made to make things historically accurate. I would say, as a rule of thumb, in the 50s and 60s, entertainment was key. And it was
almost propaganda still. Almost propaganda.
Yeah.
There's a significant element here of directors being asked to create films that sold well. I mean, when you think about to how this was scripted, we were talking about the cast a moment ago. There was a request from the studio to have more women in it, and Sturgis pushed back against that and said, that's not the film I want to make. So there's, you're absolutely right.
It wasn't a particularly nice portrayal of women that they were suggesting, because I believe one of them was suggesting that it should be the woman that cradles like David McCallum as he dies should have cleavage on show, which A, is not accurate for 1944 Germany, and B, would have been completely bizarre. So, you know, it's thank God Sturgis sort of like stood up and said, no, we're not doing that. You know, even though it might not meet the criteria of, say, today, where we should have women having conversations with each other about things that women would have conversations with, not just to propel the plot and to be male-centric.
I think
it wouldn't fit that, but some films you can't force that into, and you definitely don't want some sort of like sexist inclusion just, you know, to put on the poster.
Yeah. I think I think one of the reasons it works is it's got a foot in each camp. It's got a foot in the historical representation of history, albeit with some errors, but it's also got a foot in the complete escapade, Kelly's Heroes kind of world. And it's also got just in a thriller. I mean, it's a thriller as well. It's not a war film. Virtually no one's wearing uniform. We can't do an alley Italian. There's almost no weapons in it. The couple of pistols aren't there really, and there's 34 in the guard tower, but really there's not much in the way of weaponry in it at all. So you have other movies from the same era that are firmly in one of the camps, aren't there? 30 Dozen is in, and the Kelly's Heroes are in an entertainment camp. Where Eagles Dare is in the entertainment. And then you have the more Lawrence Arabia is, well, I don't know where that fits. That's confused me now. I don't know why I thought that one.
That's a whole new podcast.
Password is Courage. Don't forget, 63 was too big. POW with Password is Courage came out that year. With Dirk Bogarde and Alfred Lynch in it, and which is taking the real story of Sergeant Coward. His name wasn't he? A sergeant in another ranks camp. But that is brilliant, that movie, until the last 10 minutes when it turns into Carry On Fire Brigade, doesn't it? And it loses the tonal shift in that movie is ridiculous. It ends up with like a Carry On sing along. But that's been forgotten. So now I've been a long time since I've seen Password is Courage, but I believe from recollection that follows Charles Coward's story much more closely than The Great Escape follows the event of Stalag Luft III. But it's been resigned to people who know war films now. How many people? I'm asking now. How many people? I'm watching the comments. Does anyone knows whether Password is Courage? Who remembers it?
The other film.
Because you want a war film podcast, you two. You should know it. I didn't mean you. I meant that lot out there. That lot out in cyberspace.
Paul, the other film to ask about is the one that I think if you're looking back and you're a historian of a kind, you bring up Stalag 17.
Yeah,
black and white, classic escape movie, not made to entertain at all. Not really. It's dark. It's accurate to some extent, and it's far more representative of actually what was happening in those huts and how people were trying to escape. You're absolutely right. Great Escape is a film that has feet in both camps.
Yeah.
So to be devil's advocate for a moment, perhaps one of the most accurate points of the movie is it's an ensemble war movie where there's representations of people from around the world. So you've got Canadians, Australians, Polish, etc., etc. It's probably the one environment in a war movie where you can have all of those different nationalities represented under the Allied banner in an authentic manner, rather than having, say, like a Guns from Navarone sort of like multi-conglomeration commando raid type sort of storyline. You get all those different nationalities lumped into a camp together, and it's pretty, accurate in that sort of, from that point of view.
Yeah,
I've got. I think it's important as well that we sort of don't forget what the reaction was to the movie at the time. Talking about it 70 years after, not 70 years after the movie, but the actual events. But I found a review from the Sunday Mirror from the 23rd of June, 1963. It's 3 days after.
Would you read it to us, please, Mr. McGuire?
No problem. So. The first, they're talking about two movies, but The Great Escape is not just another war picture, nor is it another escape story. Based on Paul Brickhill's book of the mass escape from a German prison camp, it lasts for 2 hours and 50 minutes, but is never dull. There is no love interest, no heroines. It deals entirely with the lives of the airmen as they try to escape. No horror is brought in for the box office appeal. It is kept away in the background by such subtle storytelling that a film has a U certificate. The casting director deserves a medal for each actor. Richard Attenborough and James Garner co-star with McQueen, and they fit their parts beautifully.
Yeah.
I'd agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah, it was obviously received very well.
That contrasts with the Time magazine review when it first came out, which said, great film, too long and didn't need to be in colour.
Wow. Yeah. That's a bit like, quickly, that's a little bit like when Bridge Too Far comes out. UK reviews absolutely adore it. American reviews absolutely slate it. It's interesting.
It's interesting sort of like push from both sides of the Atlantic, you know, not only with the cast, so you have McQueen's role being enlarged. Garner's already a pivotal member of the cast, but then, you know, you have Attenborough and the rest of the cast, John Layton, etc., etc. They're all big British names. So you have that interesting sort of like meld together and push back and forward. I think the juggling act that Sturges did with the script and the edit of the film, because I think the original edit was something like eight hours long, the first cut.
That's what Lawrence Montaigne said. It was 8 hours. The cut he saw was 8 hours, which, God, I would like to go back and see what
that would be amazing, wouldn't it?
Extended sequences of tunnels being dug.
Yeah. I don't think even Quentin Tarantino, he's got the original 35mm acetate that Steve McQueen used to own, because Tarantino owns the LA New Beverly Theatre, and he regularly runs Steve McQueen back-to-backs, Papillon and Great Escape. And when he shot Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, they used green screens and mats to overlay Leonardo DiCaprio over the original acetate footage. They changed the colors. They tried to find the same camera lens but couldn't, and they had to go back a little bit further, but they got the angles exactly right. So we see Leonardo DiCaprio playing the part allegedly of McQueen.
Does a pretty good job too, gotta be said.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love
that. It's good because in the movie it's poised as Rick Dalton the character of Rick Dalton, who Leonardo plays, never hit the stardom McQueen.
Came over 3 Georges.
Yeah. Papard, Chikaris, and oh God, what's the third one? I've got it written here somewhere. Papard, Maharis, and Chikaris. That's who he said. And he said, I was never even had a screen test or anything like that. But it's a great homage. It's perfect, like really, really nice homage.
But McQueen is irreplaceable. McQueen is
a little bit.
A bit, yeah.
Like I said, you could cut those parts. I mean, it's a hell of a thing to say, but you could. It's a 3-hour-long movie, and you know that review is pretty bang on. There's no parts that are very dull. You know, even the part where he's being shown, you know, the work they've done on, you know, changing their uniforms into civilian clothes. I mean, that's pretty interesting anyway. But you know, there's no real bits that stand out and go, yeah, you could cut that.
I tell you what sometimes does it for me, and that's the fact that this is one of those films where unless somebody points it out to you, you've got something called a leitmotif being used by Bernstein, Elmer Bernstein, who wrote the soundtrack. So every character in this film has their own theme in some way. A leitmotif was almost invented by Wagner, I think. I think one of the most the quintessential examples of leitmotif is probably Prokofiev, Peter and the Wolf. If you've ever heard Peter and the Wolf, you've got the grandfather, and then you've got Peter, and you've got Wolf. They all have their own theme tune. This is the same. And we were talking about the film being a game of two halves, but when you listen to the soundtrack and you're not watching the film, you can still see who's doing what. It's an incredible soundtrack.
I was just about to launch into how important is the soundtrack to its longevity. And the point you made there about everyone because I've got the soundtrack on MP3s on my computer. I listen to it quite often, and because John Williams always cites Bernstein as being his inspiration in terms of everybody having the theme, because you have in the Star Wars, there's Leia's theme and there's the Imperial March, and he interlaces his protagonist themes to all the Star Wars, but less so in the other, but particularly in Star Wars. And I was reading something in the prep for this that it said the iconic film soundtracks are one where you can recognize the tune from about one bar. So, and in the greatest case, that's it. You only need to hear that. You think of even classic films like The Godfather, you have to hear more of it to recognize it. Yeah. Some of the Quentin Tarantino soundtracks, you have to hear more of it. But Magnificent Seven, same composer, you've only got to hear 2 or 3 notes, and boom, you're in. You know exactly what it is. And I think without that soundtrack, the movie would not be anything like as good as it is. Exactly the same as the Magnificent Seven. In the music is part of the wonder of watching that music, that film every day. Because I don't know about you, I can listen to music I love again and again and again and again and again. And although I've watched the Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape a lot, I now enjoy it just as much for the soundtrack as I do the actual what I'm seeing on screen. And I love the theme, which I think it's from track 5, and it's when particularly the very beautiful flowy bit when Leighton and Bronson are on the rowboat. And it's just a beautiful little melody there that just it's a masterful soundtrack. I can imagine if there's such a thing as film soundtrack school, that would be the one. You know, if you can bash out a soundtrack that good and have a variety of themes all the way through it that are all connected and yet distinct, you've kind of made it as a composer.
Ironically, Robbie, go.
You sure? Yeah. I think the soundtrack, it almost the comment you just put up there, it's over the film, like above the film. It grows out of the movie and it seeps into our general consciousness. So if you're at an England game, you've got that band that always seem to be, well, they're not there at the moment, but they've got that band that always seem to be there, and they've got the big brass things.
Using the word band in its loosest. And
you're like, oh, that's an England football song now. And you can whistle the theme tune. I think it's accessible as a theme tune. Yeah. Everyone who can whistle it. It's sort of, whether you're sort of bimbling down the road, you can whistle it. You're doing the washing up, you can whistle it. It's sort of, it fits anywhere. And I think it's just such a unique sort of soundtrack, and it gets parodied.
Well, this is where, as it's come up now, this is where we have to establish and talk about how many iconic bits of everyday life started with The Great Escape. From the fact that anybody of a certain age from Britain, if you say to someone else, good luck, you know what it means. If you do the waggly bit with your trousers, you know you're being a penguin. All those things, the motorbike, and we'll put your graphics up. We'll do it now, Rob, because you worked out some pop culture things. Because it has spawned just a huge amount of things. Like, I'm not comparing it to Shakespeare now. That's going a bit, but people there are people who quote Shakespeare without knowing they're quoting Shakespeare, themes and language. And I think there's now generations who don't even know they're referencing The Great Escape stuff. I'm sure there are football fans who don't know where that tune comes from, but they would recognize it, and they know, as you said, Robbie, they know what it means. It's patriotism. It's never give up. It's because that theme at football gets played when you're winning and you're losing. That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
But did you want to say something there, Matt, about the foot? Did you nod there? You wanted to say something?
No, I was agreeing.
You were just agreeing. Okay, so let's go back to these iconic moments. So, Robbie, you've done the prep on this. So,
I just a little rundown of some of the pop culture things from Great Escape. So it's starting off with McQueen's jumper. I mean, come on. I mean, I don't think many US aircrew were probably wearing the things. Definitely wearing the boots. Maybe wearing the khakis. But that sweater is just pure 60s cool sort of thing. It's still being remade now. You know, everyone, I was saying to my wife earlier, I said, everyone has known a dad who wishes they were McQueen on that bike. And I knew a guy, this is back when I used to live in London, who lived 3 or 4 doors down from me. He would wear the khakis. He would wear the boots. He had the flying jacket. He had the sweater. He was McQueen every day of his life. And I think that sort of McQueen cool just sort of seeps out so everywhere. You know, even on the DVD cover, there's McQueen on the bike now. I don't think Attenborough and co even get a look.
No, they don't make it to the thing now. I mean, we'll touch on this just while I've got that thought in my head, because someone just said, where's the comment there? Britain has embraced the film more than any other nation. That seems to be true. I'm finding out this week that it hasn't translated even to our English-speaking neighbours, Australia, Canada, the USA, in the same way. But the paradox of why we've embraced it is that none of the British get home. Well, John Layton does, doesn't he, I suppose? But the adventure part of it is the American side in many ways. It's Steve McQueen, the motorbikers, James Guy, and aircraft. The British here. I mean, Donald Pleasance is not a heroic character in that sense, is he? I mean, he is, but he's a scholar, not an action figure. So, but yet we seem to have identified with it in a way that other nations haven't, and yet. Because McQueen is American, and he's the most heroic in that conventional action movie sense, and yet the Americans don't seem to have embraced it in the way we do. That's interesting. I don't know where I'm going with this line of thought, but it is interesting. Merryn, what's your thought on why it's a particularly British thing? What the legacy of it?
Why is it particularly British? What the film?
Yeah. Why we're the ones who obsess about it more than other nations?
I think there's something underlying here that might skew it, and that is the bikes. It is McQueen's insistence that they use Triumph TR6 trophy rather than use the R71s, the Wehrmacht German bikes. I think there's a connection there that people don't see and don't feel, don't realise, but it is a connection that's quintessentially British. This is did
you actually have one of those bikes, Merryn? He said, giving an opportunity to brag.
I might have had a TR6 trophy, yes, amongst other triumphs in my time. I've got one at the minute. I'll try and keep this quite quiet, but yes, this was a time. The time in which this film is portrayed is a time at which 280, 300 independent British bike marques had to pull rank. They could no longer do short production runs. They had to actually stop what they were doing, stop building great bikes, and actually contribute to the war effort. So if Germany hadn't invaded Poland, Triumph wouldn't have existed in the way it does today. The bike itself has become a cultural icon. Robbie, you've got the jumper there, and I'm sure you've got other bits of pop culture that have emerged. But for me, what makes this film so important is the bike, and that almost does injustice to the essence of the film as a POW escape movie. But I'm sorry, it is the bike. It becomes bigger than the sum of its parts because we've got the TR6 in there, and because it does what it does. It's become iconic. When we see the posters now, we see McQueen on the bike, WH13371.
And the last documentary about the film, about the event, the focus was on Guy recreating the jump, wasn't it? That was
Guy Walters. Yeah, they used the 1200
Scrambler. And so the bike and the movie have now become embedded and connected as the movie has with the history, and it's now now with, as we said there, Robbie, with the football team as well. The Great Escape is just moving forwards on all these fronts, and the references, the jokes, the spoofing of it.
Well, you talk about the spoofing. When we think about Chicken Run, Mel Gibson's Chicken Run, Nick Park's Chicken Run, that film is now being used in KS2 in schools. So school children are being asked at quite a young age to look at parts of Chicken Run and look at parts of The Great Escape and correlate the two. And we've got great scenes in Chicken Run where Ginger is throwing a Brussels sprout against the wall. And Nick Parks built that film on the essence of The Great Escape. For me, that's a great thing, because at least there's a really thin thread that is actually pulling this film forward for the next generation. And to have that in the curriculum is fantastic. It's aspiration and hope that actually people will find a connection to it and go and explore it for themselves later on. I love the fact it's become part of our culture. I really do.
And McQueen, look at him there in that image there. he could be in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. To that, nothing about his look is in any way stuck in any era. That is a completely universal look.
It's timeless.
Stalag 17. It came. I got into trouble with who did I get in trouble with on Twitter? Someone the other day because it was Matt Bone, because my problem with Stalag 17 now is I find the clunky humor really, really awful. The bits with the Betty Grable obsession. If I could take those bits out, those two characters, Harvey Lembeck and Robert Strauss, I think the movie's brilliant. I love the fact that they don't all like each other in the heart. They annoy each other. I love all that. I love how William Holden's character is an anti-hero. But the comedy shtick is rooted in a sense of humor that died out in about 1947. I don't think it is even particularly still with it in 51 when it was made. I think it was tired then, and I think Stalag 17, for the comedy reasons, will struggle to find an audience in the future, because those bits, like Mickey Rooney in A Breakfast at Tiffany's, the Japanese, makes that movie difficult to examine. Now, there's nothing in The Great Escape, I think, at all that any woke, I hate that word, would say that's wrong. It's timeless. It has nothing in it, I think. Can you think of anything that's any way inappropriate for a modern? I can't think of anything.
No, I think it's harmless. I think in its representation, it's pretty harmless. I don't think it doesn't attack any stereotypes. It doesn't use them to belittle or anything like that. I don't.
Well, that's Matt's point. Is that the different nationalities are portrayed, but they're portrayed honorably. Okay, yes, Jenny Grant would grumble that Charles Bronson is playing a Pole and he's not, because he was Lithuanian, Charles Bronson, by birth. But at least they've made an effort to put someone from kind of vaguely the right kind of world. You know, they could have had James Coburn play a Canadian or an Australian, but you know, they're as bad as his accent is. There's no. It's not. I know Bartlett makes a line to go and play with your kangaroos, but that's not. That's the kind of banter men would have happened in that environment. I think it's very modern, the script.
We could pick fault with it in the same way that we go back to saying Mark II parachutes, Arnhem, but that's too easy. It's too easy to look back and you know, flick through and go, oh, but you know, this is wrong and that's wrong and the other's wrong, and look at the seat on the bike, it's 6 inches thick, etc. Why is that happening? But that ruins the whole shtick. You don't need to pick fault with this film. It's just a fantastic piece of cinema.
That's just a good point there Sheldrake just made about the portrayal of the Germans, because there's nuance, actually. Yes, there's definitely the very, very evil Gestapo, the guy with the glasses. I think, Cavendish, you'll regret to have put this, that he's very, very comic book. But the commander is sympathetic. The guards, I mean, the guy who James Garner bribes, Robert Graff, the actor, is portrayed very affectionately, really. And this is the early 60s. This is really when Germans weren't being given that level of nuance. This isn't the Schindler's List era. This isn't the good German era. This is when comics and TV shows were still very much the squareheads, the Bosch, so James Clavel, of course, was the key screenwriter who later did Shogun. Later on, was his big hit in the 70s. So he seems to, from what I've read about him, seems to have been very, very well traveled, very worldly wise, very understanding and embracing of cultures, and he respected the cultures he wrote about, as opposed to took advantage of their cliches. So they were blessed with a really good screenwriter, as they were a composer, as they were a director, as they were a cast. The subject of production, because I know you've all done your prep and stuff. We'll go back to your pop culture stuff in a minute, Rob. I think we'll save that for a bit. But let's go back to production. Because Matt, I know when you're fighting on film stuff, you're very good at printing up some of those bits of trivia and stuff. So interesting things that you've done in your prep for this show. Anything? What's come up in your... Oh, we've just lost Matt, I think. The Matt panics by that question.
Oh, no.
Robbie, I'll put that to you then, Robbie.
Well, I find the whole sort of... I mean, we talked about it before, but I find, like, McQueen getting his part rewritten so he can do less, but then wanting to be revered more as a hero. I find that really interesting. I find it I find it interesting how they built a whole, they built the whole prison, and Pleasance was walking around it going, this is how it was. This is great. This is not great, but it looks great. It looks authentic. I think that's one thing we haven't hinted on. Looking at everything just visually, nothing looks wrong and out of place. There might be some 47 pattern jackets in there in some places.
I don't think so. I've
really?
put it through the BD lens, and there's nothing. A couple of the really background extras are mostly German students who are on summer break from whichever university it was.
Right.
Are wearing some 49 pattern stuff in the really, but the all the main cast and kind of the people. There's a few extras you see. The guy, like the German guy who does the keys. He was a German student, that guy. There's people of that kind of level of recognition as extras, and all their stuff is good. All their stuff is good. Insignia to me is good. One thing that baffles me is why they changed the traps, because the one they escape out of in the film, which is the shower one, was Dick, which was never discovered. And the one they discover with the stove on the top in the film, it's Tom, but that was Harry's trap. I wonder why, because that's the weird thing. Wally Fluddy, who'd invented them, was on set. So I wonder why they did that. Does anyone know why? Merryn?
It was a mistake. Yeah, it was a mistake in post-production.
Okay, how would they make that mistake in post? If they've
It was a mistake. Okay, in post-production. So it was a mistake, as in he was on set advising them. But when they decided how they were going to script it, he wasn't on set. He wasn't on set all the time.
Right. And that is Wally Fluddy there for those who did with the earlier show. So Wally was the original Tunnel King, and he was on set for at least, they took lots of photos of him there. Interestingly, I think, to kind of use them in the, no, we had someone there who was there. Mm. There's a conscious effort to making sure it's in photo. And I love that photo of Wally Fluddy in the camp, because if one single photo shows what captivity does to you, that one there does it. I mean, you can just see he's not been eating well. There's a I know he's been shot down, but they're all a bit healthy, if we're being honest, aren't they, in the movie?
It's little known that he volunteered to go out on and try to escape through a delousing exercise. So they used to be sent to the showers for delousing. He actually emulated the "I will go and come back" exercise that Steve McQueen does, and he said, "Well, I'm going to be back in a couple of weeks. Don't worry about it." And was told, "Well, no, not really. We'd actually rather you go out through a tunnel. We don't want you to go because you'll just make too much noise."
So Matt, before we lost you there, sorry to interrupt you. Any other things of the production that you find particularly interesting in your prep for this, Matt?
Yeah. Sorry about that. One of the interesting things about the uniforms, to jump off on that point, was, they could have easily gone with the standard sort of like field grey, boring uniforms, but they went with the Luftwaffe sort of like grey blue, and they all have the little tabs on. They all have the correct tabs. So the yellow is for aviation trained troops, so like ground crews, pilots, etc. And then the red tabs are for anti-aircraft gun, that kind of corps within the Luftwaffe. So that's pretty interesting.
And I want to just point out the detail of the fact they have a lot of the guys RAF in army battle dresses, because that's the kind of thing that would trip up people who don't know their stuff. Why are those RAF guys in army battle dress? But of course, for those who don't know, the supplies they got via the Red Cross, I'm guessing, were just generic stuff for prisoners, and the stuff that was coming through was standard 1940 pattern battle dress. So you see in the original photos, you see RAF guys have taken off their insignia off their 4-pocket tunics or their RAF battle dress, and they put them on the army there. He's got his RAF rank on the epaulets there. So that was a nice little detail. And that John Layton is probably the closest, by the way, to Jens Muller, the Norwegian who actually made it back, because of the similarity of how the fact they got via the port. The movie isn't clear which harbour they get to. It was Stettin in reality, but whether it's meant to be Danzig or I don't know where it's meant. It doesn't matter. But the use of the flight jumpers and things. I really like the costuming where they've had that blend of issue and stuff sent in parcels. Because it would be very easy to have got it too scruffy and lose the sense of military, but it would have been too easy as well to make it like they're all still in their uniforms as they bailed out of bed. There's a really nice blend of you get the sense they've all been in that camp, or been in camps, a lot of them for months, if not years, and they've had to make do as they go along. And that's a kind of a good detail for the era. Look at the era of the Devil's Brigade, 68, where there's just no attempt made to get any of the American uniforms right or the German uniforms right whatsoever. Tobruk, no one makes any particular attempt to get the British uniforms different to the Africa Corps. The Great Escape, again, seems to have landed on its feet with whoever was doing the costuming did a really good job. Another thing worth mentioning, I think. So,
something in regards to costume that I always wondered was what's in James Coburn's suitcase.
Yeah, why is that something?
I don't know. He never taking a pretty big suitcase. So I always just wondered, like, what is he insisting on taking?
Is it the suitcase from Pulp Fiction? Is that the earlier model? Is it simply just a plot device? Is it? I don't know.
Yeah. He's seen with it. When he finally gets to the cafe, and he's kept hold of it, puts on the back of the bike he steals, and gets it through the tunnel without knocking. He could have easily knocked down a supporting joist in the tunnel, and everyone would have been livid. But he got out with it. So I always wondered, what is he taking with him that's so important?
I don't know what he's taking with him. I know that from the production side, I love the fact that the uniforms are almost spot on. I just sort of hug myself every time I watch the bike scene because of all the problems that there are there, and it becomes something that I kind of sort of digest and go, well, everybody knows that the barbed wire fence is made of black elastic bands that the crew was putting together, but not everybody realizes that Steve McQueen actually chased himself. He was put onto when the sidecar goes up the track and the what is ostensibly a Trike 206 goes round again. That's Steve McQueen dressed as a German.
Yeah, you can tell by his shoulders. He's got a very distinctive riding style, isn't he?
Yeah, but when we think about all those kind of clever things about McQueen doing the riding on a German bike, if you actually dissect the scene in which he does the jump, and this is not to take away from the fact that this is a film about escapes, but when he does the jump, the editing involved in Bud Idkins setting it up, and then McQueen, and then Idkins going underneath the barbed wire, and it's just fantastic. The production values in putting that all together at the end of the day they are just incredible. That's what sells it to me as a film that I don't mind that it's not true to what happens, because it is just a fantastic piece of cinematography at the end of the day.
Sheldrake just said something that I think I was thinking about saying myself, and about the suitcase. As we discussed with Guy Walters earlier, one of the problems with the real escapers is they all looked a bit out of place. They all weren't quite enough winter clothing. They all looked, and maybe a suitcase that looked like it couldn't possibly have come through a tunnel would be the one thing that would subconsciously, if you're German, because he does make it, James Cope, maybe it is the suitcase, his lucky talisman, is that he can't have brought that out of a tunnel. That's clearly a guy going on vacation, a holiday, because it's the size of a suitcase. So maybe that there is that sense of it worked because it looked real. I don't know. But your points about the motorbike chase and we were talking about costuming remind me again that it is clearly a movie of two halves, because all that attention to detail to get their camp gear correct with the battle dresses and the jumpers and the sweaters and they throw that out the window with the escape gear, doesn't they? I mean, James Garner's suit. I love the film, but James Garner's suit. I know they have the scene where Richard Attenborough meets Griff, the tailor, and they've got some cloth, but none of the cloth they're showing there is the cloth from that suit.
It's the one scene that rankles for me, because it goes on and on and on with this model, and then we've got lapels. And
the only one you could really
too much. It's too much. The bolts of cloth. It's like, really. Yeah. Would he have scrounged bolts of cloth? It's just too much. It almost feels manufactured to make a point that they were making. Yes, they were making uniforms, or they were trying, but it's too much.
Well, one of the things I thought about doing with Guy earlier, but I thought I'd save it for tonight, is this reference. This is a bit more in depth to this, is that the James Garner character is the scrounger. That's what he's referred to. But actually, it's bribery, isn't it? There's as Guy explained earlier, a lot of the stuff they got from the Germans was bribery that became blackmail. Scrounger is like scrumping compared to theft, isn't it? It's like it's the entry level of kind of criminality, isn't it? It's like, because my only police record I have myself is I was caught scrumping when I was 8 years, and my policeman took me home holding my ear. I don't think scrumping is a capital. I don't think you're likely to get sent off to Devil's Island for scrumping. But that, to me, the scrounger is the way they call him a scrounger is somehow giving it a cheeky chappy element, that actually the real way they got the equipment was by bribe. And what Guy Walters said earlier about the fact that when Absalom, the SS guy, came to investigate, it was more to investigate the Germans for being complicit in the escape by allowing all these shenanigans to go on than it was actually investigating that. I mean, I know I had read the book, but when Guy's so articulate and brilliant, it kind of it landed there, and I thought, yeah, the Germans are part of this. But scrounger is an interesting choice of words. Merryn, you're the writer here. Why do you think scrounger, not bribery? Does it make James Garner's character more likable?
No, I think it was very much to do with the fact that James Garner in Young Don Poe in Korea, he was a scrounger, and that was the term that was used. He was officially charged with scrounging when he was on active service, and that's one of the reasons why his performance is so credible, because he just turned up and went, well, I'll do what I used to do 10, 15 years ago. Subliminally, scrounging, bribing, when we think about it, if we put the Germans into a pocket that says they were obsessed with documentation, they're obsessed with getting things perfect, and they were documenting everything, we can understand why they would be process driven and fall into the trap of, well, of course you need receipts for this. Absolutely no problem. Of course I'll sign you. Oh,
yeah,
I've signed a receipt.
Yeah.
And at that point, you start to understand the cultural differences between the Americans being able to say, yeah, sure, and the Germans just following process. And for them, it wouldn't have been anything untoward to say, oh, I need to sign for it. Becomes something.
That reminds me of one of my favorite obscure stories from Normandy. I'm going for a tangent, but it's my show, so I can. I'm enjoying it. I'm having whiskey. Tamdu, 10-year-old, nice, very nice. Is that Pluska, Major Pluska, famously played by Hans Christian Blech in The Longest Day, who actually wasn't on the beaches on the morning of D-Day. He was in Caen. And this came out 15 years ago when the owner of the brothel in Caen, where he actually was that morning, came with the ledger where he had signed himself into the brothel. And it was, I'll have one of them, and if I've got some breath back, I'll have two of them. And it was all there. And the thing that I found really interesting that my French friends, when that came out, didn't pick up on, is that Pluska had signed his own name in the book, in the brothel. Now, if I have never been to a brothel, but if I do, that's my chance to invent my own person. I'd go in and call myself, my name is Count von. I'd make some shit up because they wouldn't care who I am as long as I give them money. But it was to me that the fact that the German used his own name suggested kind of a sense of kind of lack of imagination. And why I can imagine in this prisoner of camp environment, the Germans do, I'm being into racial cliches now, and I don't really mean to do that. Why the guards, though, would ask for receipts, because it's part of the way they work. It's part of that Germanness. But we've got off on a tangent a bit there. But yeah, when you look about Scrounger, though, to me, though, implies, and I know I've read James Garner's background as well, you're scrounging from your own men, though. It's your own side. He's getting stuff in the Korean War from other U.S. Army places to feed his own people. He's getting, in the movie, he's getting it from the enemy. That's where bribery and scrounging, to me, are different.
I'm just going to really jump in, because I've just seen a comment. Colin Taylor has mentioned something that I wasn't going to go down this whole language route, but it's absolutely, forgive the phrase, cock on. It really is. Words have emotions, and if they had used anything except scrounging, you said it, Paul, scrumping, scrounging, that doesn't make you a bad guy. That just means you're getting apples to make some cider. If they'd said bribery, blackmail, coercion, then they would have flipped the psychological view of James Garner's character. It would have been bad. But what we're trying to do here is find affinity with the direction that says, actually, this was a good thing to do. It's a really difficult thing to pull off, to actually have somebody committing a crime as a positive thing.
Yeah, and Colin, who's one of my best mates here, is a poet as well as being a tour guide. So words are very important to him, and we have these discussions when we have whiskey about the importance of language and nuance of language. But as Willie just reminded me, or us, Bartlett's character Bushell, Attenborough does refer to Henley as a scrounger, but then maybe that's because Bartlett is, as his character, he's less subtle, isn't he? He is, as he says, when he has the meeting with the senior British officer played by James Donald, who was representing Ramsay, but he's Ramsay in the film, Massey in reality. Bartlett's character is the one who absolutely sees the Germans as they're all enemy. We're fighting the bloody lot, he says, doesn't he? Whereas Guy Walters earlier said that the fact that their relationship between a lot of the people at the camp, the guards and the prisoners, was kind of almost fatherly, because they were older Luftwaffe guys who perhaps have been, wounded in combat, and they look down at these. But that's an aspect of the story of the Stalag Luft III that we don't really want to hear. That we don't want to hear that they're pat. We want to hear about us getting one over on the guards. Yeah. But Robbie, the language thing and the roles. I mean,
I think it's you don't want your heroes to be unlikable, do you? And especially if you're going to get in someone like James Garner, who at the time is a massive star, you kind of don't want to go against type, do you? You want heroes to play heroes, you want villains to play villains. I think it would have been a bit odd if you'd have made Garner to be out like some sort of thief. It just might have been a little bit off.
That maybe I'll bring in Matt and Merryn, but maybe that is one of the things that sets it in its time, though, because the heroes are heroic, the baddies are bad. In that we are now used to your Peaky Blinders kind of things, where it's anti-heroes. The cop characters in mainstream TV, particularly, and TV because TV has time over long extended episodes to develop character better, but most of our TV heroes are anti-heroes now, aren't they? I would argue, or not most, but a lot are. I mean, Cillian Murphy's character in Peaky Blinders, he's not lovable, but we root for him. I mean, Kevin Spacey in Game of House of Cards. I know it's finished now, but the despicable person. So Great Escape, that's maybe the one thing that roots it in the late 50s, 60s era, is the heroes are identifiably heroic. And James Garner is clean cut America, isn't he? As is Steve McQueen. And so that's an interesting, maybe that's the one thing that does date it. But any more production stories that you want to air before we go into carry on with the legacy and the impact and the pop culture? Anything about the production that we think we want to share?
No.
So let's talk about the legacy. Let's move on then. So we were halfway through your pop culture reference, and again we're kind of finding out that this is maybe more British based than our other international viewers tonight. But run through this slide you prepared for us here. I mean, the games.
Yeah, the game has two games, as you can see, and one from 1986, which is released on 16-bit computers, your Commodore ZX Spectrums. I think everyone watching probably owned one of those at one time. But the one that gets it for me is the 2003 release, because that's a genuine movie tie-in to a film that came out 40 years before. I think it's very interesting anyway. Uses McQueen's likeness. There are characters based on Big X. There are characters based on Mac. They don't have their likenesses, but I just think it's interesting that it gets two video games made of it, and then one in 2003, which I did play, and it is very hard. Even on easy mode, it's a bit of a hard game. But me and Matt found that it can be completed if you speed run it shorter than it takes to watch the movie. So that's another bit
evidence of that is online.
Yeah. And then, we were, and then you get into these parodies and homages. So I did a bit of digging. I found possibly like 8 or 10 adverts that referenced The Great Escape. You got ones that stood out for me was Holston Pills did a really long running advert series of parodying movies, and this one that came out in the late 80s, and it's got Griff Rhys-Jones, and he pops up and he going, "Oh, we're gonna break out all these Holston Pills bottles. Oh, how many are you gonna break out? 250 of the blighters. 250? You insane? It's like it's a perfect parody. McDonald's parodies it as well, but there's a little Holston connection, Holston Pills connection with The Great Escape. Donald Pleasance originally did the TV ads for Holston Pills in the 80s, so I think that's a little connection there.
Alert.
Yeah, sorry, with that bit of a rabbit hole. And then my next slide.
But the thing is, though, and this is what I'll let you carry on talk, but a Great Escape advert today would still work, even though the movie is however many years old, because, as we said, even youngsters are aware of it without knowing why they're aware of it. They know the theme tune, they know the symbolism, even if they haven't watched the film. And that is an incredible legacy for a movie to have, where it's known beyond itself.
When Ford did their Puma advert, the Ford Puma, they shot Steve McQueen as though he was in the car from Bullitt, and at the end of the advert they had him pulling into a garage even, with the Mustang, and in the corner was WH13371, the Triumph. It is quintessentially a film that cascades from generation to, you don't need to have watched the film to have it as part of your life. It's integrated in our culture.
Yes,
and that's the thing. Like all these adverts, they're 40, some 50 years after the film comes out, and this Umbro England kit is connected, with the music. But it's like a mini movie. The England shirts get bought in a Leyland DAF British Army truck. You've got the trainer, the England singer. You have to earn it. And then you've got the paparazzi there trying to get a glimpse of the new kit, and even the ending of the advert there, you've got the iconic red lettering. I think it's really interesting that this movie, maybe over others, gets parodied a lot more in advertising and things. And I think it's what we mentioned earlier with that iconic sound. You've got the bike, you've got McQueen. Going back earlier about the clothes, Barber still do a Steve McQueen collection, and his jumper is one of the things they've recreated for it. I just think it's quite unique, and as we said,
and there's stacks of leather jackets you can buy. You can buy 12-inch figures of the Hiltz character. You can buy the leather jacket with the Hiltz name on it. You can buy posters of the bike. You can buy models of the bike. You can buy. There's nothing you can't get. In my prep for this, I found out it's never once been off the charts of sales of war films in any of the formats since we. So from Betamax, VHS, DVD, Betamax video, widescreen video, DVD extras, Blu-ray, and then the restored Blu. And yes, Matt, I have got all of them. I have.
Is there a laser version?
I just have. But this is the thing about its longevity and its legacy that I think is fascinating, because I can't think of many other films that have that reach.
Possibly
as I was saying earlier with the Christmas movie, it's become one of those quintessential Christmas movies, and perhaps that speaks more to the longevity of it within the British sort of popular consciousness than it does with the American, because it's something that entire families sit down and watch year on year. It's as we mentioned earlier, it's so acceptable. There's nothing in there that could be stereotypical or offensive. So it's unlike Zulu, say, which is another Christmas classic. There's some problematic stuff there, but with The Great Escape, it's something that you can put on TV for decades to come. So I think that has reinforced its sort of like place within the popular consciousness, and that's why adverts can play on it, because it doesn't have any of those sort of connotations that can be taken where you might go, oh, okay, there's nothing in there that is offensive. Even the portrayal of the Germans, it's there's some realistic stuff there, but it's it isn't even they haven't stereotyped the Germans overly completely. So
I mean, at this point,
I think that plays into it.
We received about the British having a longer memory. I would agree, but I'd also say only for the right stuff. I'm sure there's a whole stack of what I would count classic British war films that Robbie, well, you three would know, but I think a lot of people watching this would have forgotten about a lot of them. Things like Danger Within, School for Secrets, Too Late, The Hero, that I still think of, but I think a lot of people just haven't seen these films. The Great Escape, though, is something a bit different. But I think we need to turn a bit to any kind of negative legacy, because we're talking about the kind of fun aspect, because as has come up during this week, 50 aviators were murdered horribly, grubbily and nastily. And even the poster, I'll put the poster up in a second again, the way the tagline is what does it say? It's a great adventure. I've got this the different poster. This one says a glorious saga, but one of them says great adventure, great entertainment, doesn't it? And you go, I know they cover the murders, albeit with this nobility that perhaps wasn't there. Does the adventure somehow mean we're not examining the real history properly and objectively with this, with the dark aspect that came up with Guy earlier today, in that 8,000 plus other hiding prisoners of war and people who were trying to hide from the Third Reich were mopped up in it after this one. Even Wednesday's early escape, 14,000 others were rounded up. So Guy's point is, without trying to be negative about it, is that actually these escapes did the reverse of what they were supposed to do. The Germans actually gained from it. The Germans gained more captures because of these escapes. So does the movie being a fun thing mean the average person is not digging beyond that to the real truth? I'll bring in Merryn on that. So is that the downside of the movie being so popular?
So if we look at The Great Escape as a quintessential example of 50s and 60s cinematography, the films of this era dehumanize war. Sturgis creates a spirit of optimism and defiance in the face of the enemy. And what The Great Escape does not do is portray Nazi crimes. It avoids thinking about the Holocaust. It circumvents any discussion of the ideologies at play. It just skirts the whole issue. In that respect, it's not a great film. It really doesn't do justice at all to historiography in any way. But does it, and this for me is the crucial question, does it, by virtue of the fact that it makes it palatable to start talking about and looking into and engage with the subject, overcome some of the challenges that make it very difficult for people who don't know about the Second World War to understand actually what happened? And in that respect, yes, I think it does work, because Robbie, you were going to say something.
The point you bring up at the end, Merryn, is I bang on about this. I think I bang on it about the podcast. I mention it on my Twitter feed a lot when I can, and when it comes up. These movies are really important. Whether you like the fact they get the history wrong or the history right, to me, doesn't mean a jot, really. They now, more than ever, they can lead someone in to learn the history properly. And if we can capture 10 people who've seen the movie from the first time, or even one person who goes away and finds out the actual history, and that leads into possibly, becoming a historian or making things in a history sphere that portray the real history properly, then these movies are so crucial, because you have to capture people with the popular culture. And if it's doing anything, it's still beating the drum for those men who lost their lives, absolutely awful, but it's keeping the memory of the Second World War alive. And as we go on 5 years, 10 years time, it's going to be even harder. So these movies are going to have to do even more work to keep people interested. And I think that's my big hill to die on, and I'll die on it every time.
No, that makes sense to me. And I mean, I'm glad. I would be a bit more uncomfortable about doing this show about the movie on my channel, which is more historically based. Yours is legitimately about war films, without having done the 6 episodes that preceded this, where we have gone into some of the real people, the tragedy. We can look at the light-hearted aspects of it and the pop culture thing. I don't feel any guilt for having this discussion, because it's one of 7. It sits within a body of work. And maybe if I was in charge of BBC, I would show The Great Escape, and then afterwards I would show a documentary that would push people on to something a bit more, and say, let's look at the real dark aspect of this. Let's have a lingering image of bodies in the snow and what happened to these men and how poor Roger Bushell, the Schultz, I think it was Schultz who shot him. He didn't even do a very good job to go and kneel in the snow and put the pistol to his head. And it was a horrible, slow memory. There was no moment where Bushell says to Mac, well, I've never been happier. No, you're dying. As Guy Walters said, probably still with your penis in your hand because you were going for a pee at the side of the road. I mean, we don't want to be dramatic for no point. That's how they were shot. They were shot on a pee break, and that's not a dignified way to end. Is lying in snow with your penis out, being shot in the back, and then shot again through the head because the guy shot you badly. Matt, you wanted to say something about that?
Yeah, I think it contrasts with, say, war crimes are always a difficult thing to sort of portray in film, but when you think about films like Battle of the Bulge with the Malmedy massacre and the portrayal of that, I think with The Great Escape we get sort of perhaps the right balance for the tone of the movie, in that Mac and Bartlett are having a conversation, and you see their realization, they know what's coming, but in reality, as Guy said, they didn't know what was coming. It was an outright murder. So I think the way it's handled in the film fits the film, and it's a classy way of doing it. Whereas the Battle of the Bulge Malmedy scene isn't really classy because it's just inserted for the point of that's something that happened. So there it is. It's a narrative point that isn't really needed, and it's quite gratuitous. I think they had it a little better, but yeah.
And the editing is good in that sense, in that the way they cut those last 10 minutes.
Cinematically, it's good.
It's good because
in understanding the history, not so good, obviously.
I mean, because we think of the jump over the fence as being the last bit of the film, but of course it isn't, is it? There is, he gets brought back in the camp, and I think that they handle it very well when James Garner comes back and it says how and Group Captain Ramsey has the meeting with the Germans and von Lindheim, or he's called, I forget what his character's called in the film. Von Luger doesn't want to make eye contact, and he handles that very well, the German actor there. And Hans Mesmer was a veteran; he'd been there, and as Till Kiwi, who played one of the German guards, they'd been in the German military. They understood that. That scene is handled very well. James Doland, actually, we didn't mention him any earlier. I think he's an underrated performer in that film. I think he gives great gravitas and dignity to the Ramsey character, balancing this ability to want to escape and yet trying to. It does that beautifully, and then. And it is dedicated to the 50, but at the same point, it still leaves us with the bass, which is the right way to just you've been dropped down, but you've just been given that little hint of an upward turn that the war is going to go our way. I think that was really beautiful how they did that. It was the right ending, I think, to the 50, and then up come the credits, and you see all the way Sturges films always have the bit where they have a little clip of the actor talking and the name comes up. They're doing the same in As Eagle Has Landed, so it's beautifully handled, the end of the film there. But Merryn, I think, did you want to say something about this negative legacy? Have we all addressed that now? I've had whiskey now. I'm forgetting where we are in the conversation. Someone help me. I'm lost control.
Yeah, I think it's useful to kind of remember that the film as a whole is, in one way, it's a message about the fact that prisons are temporary, that both the prisoners of war and the guards themselves are unable to escape. There's no differentiation. You can take the uniforms off, you can stand the men naked in the yard, and they're all confined in the same geographic area. Detainment is very much a state of mind, and political influence and military influence will keep opposing forces together against their will. Where's it take us? If we watch the film today as old farts and people who haven't seen it before, where does it take us now in terms of understanding what we need to remember? Does it take us as historians into an instant discussion about what's wrong with it, or does it take us into the dialogue about, well, this is brilliant because it helps people to just start remembering? That's the question that I kind of sort of lean towards, which is, it's a fantastic film. We see McQueen, we see Bushell, we see the POWs, but at the end of the day, what is the question? The question is this a great film because it does two things very well? It keeps feet in both camps, and it's a great experience to sit and watch it. Or is it a great film because for all its flaws, it still brings people together to talk about actually what happened? That's
we wouldn't see as many documentaries made and as many books written about it if that film hadn't been made in 1963.
Yeah.
So Guy wouldn't have written his book.
Correct.
Numerous other people wouldn't have written their books if that film hadn't been made out of the original book, or that original book had inspired the film.
It's one of the few. My stepdaughters who came into my life 7 years ago. Maddie, the youngest, who studied film editing at college, now is actually probably moving into cookery now. She's a change of heart. She's 20 in Paris and kind of finding herself. But she was shown a lot of French movies at school and a lot of American movies, fewer British movies. And it was quite a struggle to kind of convince her to kind of watch things like A Matter of Life and Death and The Red Shoes and Black Gnosis. I'm a bit of a Powell and Pressburger fan. But The Great Escape we sat and watched together. And it was really interesting sitting with someone who's never seen it before, because I can't really even imagine what it was like to have not seen that movie. I can't imagine not having seen it. When you said, Robbie, the other day that you'd watched Dark of the Sun the first, what do you mean you haven't seen it before? I want to screen and punch you, because
I can totally understand.
I spent my time watching Maddie going, so her reactions, of course, it was probably the wrong age for it, because she just kind of fell in love with Steve McQueen a bit. I got a little bit caught up in just his charisma and didn't quite bite on the history, which she did a bit more with Dunkirk, which we would have seen together probably a year or two after that, or a year or so. Dunkirk ignited a bit more of an interest in what her mum and I do for a living than Great Escape did. But I think that was just, we maybe brought it. It was a bit too soon. It was, and Steve McQueen did what Steve McQueen did. He just caught her with his eyes and his mesmerizing attention thing that he does that pissed off Yul Brynner to the extent that Yul Brynner wouldn't do the remake, The Magnificent Seven, if McQueen came back. That was his, I'll do a sequel, but we're not having McQueen back because he fucking well stole that movie from me and I know it and he knows it. And so, yeah, but I'm with all of you that without that movie, we wouldn't be as knowledgeable about the Stalag Luft III and Escape and POW as we would be. And
could it be said that we'd be at a point now within the historiography of our understanding of prisoners during World War II that we wouldn't have the depth of historiography and the research that's been done if that film hadn't been made? Could that even be said?
Because even if you got someone who disagreed with the movie so much that they've gone away and proved it wrong or proved it right, then the movie's done its job in the historical sense, in the fact that someone's taken the time, to go, right, well, this was wrong, this was wrong, this was wrong, this is how it actually was. Look at my thesis, look at my documentary, showing the actual facts, and at least it's out there for us all to appreciate. Look at how you might not like 1917, you might not like Dunkirk, it came out in 2017, but they provide that link to the past, but then they give the shot in the arm of the researching and things, because then you can have someone like, I don't know, pick someone who does these sort of takedowns. Jonathan Ware, for instance, he might do a thread now about Great Escape saying this is what was and this is what wasn't. And then at least then people can read it for themselves and think, actually, yeah, I'll appreciate the movie more now I know the actual facts, or I'll appreciate it less, or whatever. But it just
makes people reappraise what they think they know.
Yeah.
So,
I think, sorry, I was just going to jump in there. Anyone who doesn't like the movie, I kind of just think I want to say you're wrong. I mean, there are certain. If you don't like that movie as a piece of entertainment, then you don't get what movies are for. You shouldn't kind of be allowed to watch movies. There's certain movies that come into that category. Bullet, Magnificent Seven, Godfather, Star Wars. I would. If you don't like that, then you kind of shouldn't be near movies. That's a really hard statement to make because it's what movies should be. Movies should be big. They should be spectacles. They should make your jaw drop. And I can only imagine what it would have been like to see that as a big cinema in London in 1963. I've never seen it on a big screen. They showed it in London, didn't they, with Dan Snow and Paul Beaver were there. And that was all when travel was. I couldn't go and do it, but I would love to see it. And I bet I would be like a kid going in to see that now because it's a big, brilliant, brassy movie that is the epitome of the golden age of Hollywood action films.
It's exactly right. Yeah.
Mary Buckman in the comments has just said, I it's so true. It's always been part of my life. I can't remember when I first saw it. It's always been there. I think that's such a spot on comment about a very small number of films. The Dam Busters, Great Escape. You can count them on the fingers of one thumb.
Yeah.
But
I think that would make an interesting discussion about what makes those films. Yeah. Those films.
The Eagle has landed. There's a small cadre of films that it doesn't matter that there are mistakes. It doesn't matter that we sit and go, oh God, there's a leopard on the fridge. They are part of our culture. They are part of our lives, and our responsibility, in a way, is to say you don't have to engage with minutiae of actually who was doing what here and who was creating, a heinous history for you to engage. You just have to watch, enjoy it, and be in a position to engage with something that you didn't necessarily want to think about before. If it grasps something, if it captures your imagination, that's a win. That's a win in terms of when you think about how very, very little the curriculum, I know I hark back to this quite a lot, but if you think about how very little today the curriculum engages youngsters with actually what happened in the Second World War specifically, and it is only so very few years ago, then at least by exposing them to something that they might sit and enjoy watching, you'll get a small percentage of them that say, that was really interesting. I want to understand that, or at least explore it a bit more. Or at least when I'm then exposed to a fact here, I might question there and put the two together and understand that actually there's something we really do need to remember.
It's testament to the filmmaking as well back then that
it is.
Unbeknown to them, they were making a movie that would stand the test of time.
Absolutely.
Still be being remade on Blu-ray. Take your latest war epics. Take 1917. I'll use as an example again. I've seen that 3 times now. Every time I watch it, little bits fall away, little parts don't kind of add up anymore. With these older films, they've got something, and it's probably charm, it's probably the way the Technicolor looks, all that sort of thing. It just holds up much, much better. They feel like proper movies. They just have it's probably how we consume cinema back then is completely different. You make a whole day of it. Now people just go, oh, we're out. Should we go and see a movie? It's not as much of an event. But then, you would go and see the matinee. You'd go and see the cartoon. Then you'd go and see the main feature. It would be your whole day. And I think this is why those movies stand the test of time. And the stars are just bigger than life. Look at McQueen after. Look at Attenborough after. These men, they seep out of the screen at you. They jump out at you. They think, research me. Look me up. I'm a poster boy for Triumph, sort of all these things. We don't really have that now. And I think for me, that's why these movies are special.
Yeah. I was just thinking about the ending again now. We talked about the fact it has a foot in both camps with terms of entertainment and historical realism. It's neither an upbeat or a downbeat ending. It's both, isn't it? I'm thinking of the classic war films that end with victory, Midway, the original Midway 70s. It's that we've beaten the Japanese, boom, Pearl Harbor defeat. We've been this Devil's Brigade with what Zulu, I suppose, is a bit nuanced, but there's this the way they balance that murder of 50, but optimism of Steve McQueen, and the line, when he says, "I guess I will be seeing Berlin," you will be seeing Berlin before that's the line that tells the audience that the Allies win the war, isn't it? That's that when von Luger is taken away, that the Allies are going to win. So even the ending, in some ways, has a level of nuance about it that's quite remarkable, really. It is a brilliant script, isn't it? Actually, considering now we know that it was cobbled together, or half of it was cobbled together, it is really tight. There's not a wasted line, although you say that the Taylor scene's a bit too long, Merryn. But honestly, I think it's.
Sturgis famously said, "I'm not saying it's the right way to make a movie, but it was the right way to make this movie," which I think is very true.
Absolutely.
I think that encapsulates the process, because I mean, can you imagine the sort of production scale that you would have needed to make a camp, knock down all of those trees, plant more trees, organize it with the German government, have the get an internationally renowned cast to sit and tie rubber bands onto a long rubber. That takes real sort of charisma to and gravitas to say to a cast, well, if you're not doing anything, well, you can sit there and tie bits of, make a rubber barbed wire for Sting to drive into.
I mean, Lawrence Montaigne said he was on the set for 19 weeks, that's a long shoot. That's over a third of a year. That's for nearly 5 months. That's a long time. And that's not pre-production. That's not making the camp. That's not editing. But I guess it was a year. It was a year out of Sturgis' life, wasn't it? I suppose.
There was a real commitment to this. There was a real commitment to the integrity of it as well. Clavel went to research alternative locations in LA because pine trees are pine trees. And what he came back with when he talked to Sturgis was actually German pine trees don't look the same as LA pine trees. So when they eventually started scouting locations, in terms of creating the camp, their commitment to actually doing it properly was such that they got the local town mayor involved, and they brought him along to the set where they wanted to do what they wanted to do. And they turned around and said, we want to take out approximately 4,000 trees here. We'll replant 8,000, but if you look through this, you'll understand. If you look through this lens, you'll understand what we want to achieve. Their commitment was such that they already knew they were trying to portray something that had to stand up.
Yeah,
they were trying to create a piece of cinematography that had to stand up in the future as something that represented exactly what did happen. They did not want to create a film that people could pick holes in. That it's about 45-50 kilometers south of Zag. You can actually go and see a mock-up of the tunnel, and it's almost virtually the film set on which Bronson was pulled along, etc., etc. They did not want to create a film that would not stand the testament of time. And I think they succeeded. They succeeded really, really well. We can pick holes with it. We can debate it at length. But actually, it was brilliant.
Also, those trees are key because it mirrors that claustrophobia. So if you don't have those trees, that black forest, you don't get that claustrophobia. And cinematically, that is essential to giving the atmosphere of the whole movie.
Yeah,
and also ties. There's the theme. There's the darkness, nighttime theme that Bernstein uses. That is sort of hanging like it's a sort of fogginess of the music there. There's a foreboding. The scene when Charles Bronson tries to run away and John Layton goes to get him. Again, the music is such an important part of the storytelling as well. I mean, we're going to go around. We're going to end up just going around in circles now. We've been at it nearly 2 hours, and a couple of viewers have dropped away the last bit. I think they have realised no, they're just never going to stop. So I think we will bring it to an end very shortly. But it's been really interesting talking about it, and it is. The fact that people are watching us talking about this, I think, it says something. I don't know quite what it says, but it says that if they're prepared to invest in us wittering on about it for 2 hours, the movie must have some kind of merit. And it's just an iconic movie, and I I wonder if we're ever going to get to that age again. When you were saying about the classic movies, I liked Dunkirk when it came out, Christopher Nolan, but I don't think it's going to be looked at in the same way 20 years. I think it's going to be very much rooted in the early part of the 2010s and it'll be dated. I think Christopher Nolan's style, even his early films, The Prestige and the Batman trilogy is feeling a bit dated now.
The
original Dunkirk is what I like them both, but I do defend the modern Dunkirk, but I don't think it's going to have longevity, not in the way this does. I don't think 1917 will. Band of Brothers clearly will. Saving Private Ryan, I'm not even sure. A lot of people haven't seen that these days. I think you couldn't drop in many Saving Private Ryan jokes in kind of parodies and have everybody recognize it in the way you can.
Certainly not at the same scale as something like The Great Escape. No
way.
Not.
So there we are. I mean, I really enjoyed the whole week, Foxtrot Romeo said. So in terms of finishing things off, if we could go back in time and thank John Sturges for what he did there, I think to me he went out it with the right heart. The fact he had people who were in the camp there on set, Wally Floody, the attention to detail, filming on location in Germany, and we could talk about lots of other 60s movies that weren't filmed on location, and Tobruk and the Devil's Brigade all filmed in back lots. It scores highly on just about every aspect. There's nothing you can say, that's the bit that lets it down, apart from a little bit of the historical accuracy. But overall, though, I still maintain it does the arc of what it shows: men adapting skills, hiding the tunnels, creating the tunnels, forging the papers, getting out, and 50 being murdered. It covers that. That. Any closing comments from any three of you?
If you're going to go round, I'll start off. I mean, my end thought is it's a movie about men who were there, and the majority of the cast were there. So that's the layer of authenticity that it needed at the time. It still has it, and it's still a belter of a film. And the fact we're talking about it now in 2021 is testament to that. And I don't know what else you can say about it. Really,
Matt?
I think it's timeless. I think that's it. I mean, we mentioned that, Steve McQueen's look in the film was timeless, but I think the film's timeless. I think, it's a well-directed, tightly made piece. It's very long, but you don't feel it. It's something that can bring generations together. It's something that makes you think. It makes you wonder what actually happened. Is this, did this happen the way it's being portrayed? And if you don't even go into it that deeply, you still come away with an idea of what happened. In an area of World War II that could have quite easily been forgotten if it hadn't been for that book originally, and then the film that was inspired by it. We could have today we could have a relatively sort of just top level understanding of what POWs went through, if not for the work done by historians that perhaps interested and inspired by the movie itself. So I think therein lies one of its great strengths. And Robbie and I love talking about war movies on our podcast, and I think there's so many different types of war movie. The just the out and out action pieces, you get suspense movies, you get thrillers, all within this greater genre of conflict on screen, fighting on film, war movies. So I think that POW genre that has had films before and after The Great Escape is it's the Great Escape that becomes the quintessential POW film, POW World War II film.
So, as one of you said earlier, it's the benchmark, isn't it? Everything before and after will be compared to The Great Escape, which is probably why they've never remade it, because I know people talked about it, but it's just never going to work. There's no amount of money or stardom you could throw at it.
No. They remade Midway, didn't they, recently? And it's not bad, but it's not very good.
No.
And you probably end up with the same thing with Great Escape. And God, let's hope they never do remake it, because, as I said, it's timeless. They don't need to.
Yeah. Well, let's have Merryn's words of wisdom to end up then.
Okay, so for me, this is a very strange film. You can't remake it. It's engagement with the past. For me personally, it's a very strange connection. I started off by saying I read the book. It's a bit of a Kevin Bacon moment for me. I have connections with Frinton-on-Sea, which is where John Layton was born.
Yep.
My surname is Walters. Guy's written very, effusively on the subject. We are not directly related. We're the same family. We're not directly related. My mother's name was Garner.
Wow.
And my grandmother's name was Bushel.
Wow. Blimey. Okay. And
So,
Merryn's just won the evening there. Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, The Great Escape is something that is part of our culture. It's something that we don't need to dissect. It's something that we need to value and nurture as a way to engage the next generation with what happened then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. We can't say anything better than that. It will work in 10 years' time. It'll work in 20 years' time. It has not failed a generation yet. It's going to be there. It's going to be timeless. And thank heavens for that, because it is just a classic film. And if there's anyone watching this show who hasn't watched it, I can't believe there's anybody, then just go and watch it and enjoy it, and also learn from it. Take all those emotions away, because you can, as we said with Guy Waters, you can have both. You can be thrilled by Steve McQueen and also pay respect to 50 who were murdered. Those you can have both those thoughts in your head at the same time. We're complex beings. We can cope with more than one idea in our head at the same time.
Fantastic.
It's on Netflix in the UK right now, so you've got no excuse.
Yeah, and Stick Ballard said, would it be fair to say it's become part of identity? Yes, I think it has. I think it has become, in terms of being British. And it's been interesting, by the way. Thanks everybody for your comments. I can't always show all of them on screen, but it is interesting that there does seem to be a divide. If you're British, you accept it's a big thing, and Americans are going, really? It's a big part of your culture? That is as revealing to me as other things I've learned this week, that the love for Great Escape does seem to mostly stop with the English channel, for whatever reason. I say in Norway it's nothing, but anyway, in terms of what we've got coming up, I've actually got a couple of days off. I can actually go and chill out and have some more whiskey, and then it starts off with a vengeance in April. And we have, by the way, folks, got some film connections in early April. I've got shows about Kenneth Moore, who played in Sink the Bismarck and Reach for the Sky. Shows about Dirk Bogarde, Sam Fuller, the director. So we've got some Hollywood stuff coming up. And then, of course, we're into Tank Week and Female Historian Week and all sorts of things coming up. So watch this space. There's always things happening. Thank you for those of you who've become patrons recently. Thank you for spreading the word. We still need more people to find out about us. We're still, people are going, I've never heard of you yet. Come, spread the word. Tell us what we're doing. If you like, we have ways of making us talk. You'll like what we're doing here. If you like what we're doing, check out Fighting on Film. Check out History Hat. We're all part of the same group of geeks, and we all kind of know each other. And there's multiple ways of looking at history from films, from movies, from the history. So that's it. I've had a really good blast doing this, and I've enjoyed it. So I will end the stream now, and I will say again, don't forget, check out the links in below. But as for me, that's it. I'm done. I'm going to go and have a bit more whiskey and go to bed. So thank everybody for watching. This is Paul Woodadge.
Thanks, buddy.
For WW2TV.
Thanks,
Bye, everybody, and I'll end the stream.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks,
then.
guys.
You still